Hello. Today's video we're going to document the construction of a screened patio below an existing deck. As you can see, we put together some drawings to get approvals. It's important that you get approvals from your community association if it's required. And we also in our county had to get a building permit to do this, even though we're not anticipating any structural changes. From the sketch you can see we intend to install a screened patio and a door at the underside of this existing deck, and here we are. So our existing deck currently is pretty typical. We're going to span from column to column and then column to brick wall, and the first issue we got to deal with is the underdeck ceiling. Right now, as you can see, there are holes in the deck that let water pass through, so we need to install a screen barrier or a ceiling above to divert that water outside of the screened in porch. One of the very first steps that we have to do is to install some flashing against the existing house. So in between each of the joists of the deck, we are going to install some metal flashing and caulk it so that any water that leaks down along the brick wall will be diverted into our ceiling and down to a gutter that we'll discuss soon. Okay, so for flashing, we got some aluminum flashing and cut it to fit in between the joists, stuck it up against the wood that's up against the brick house. We're going to caulk and seal all these joints, and as you can see, we fasten it to the bottom with a roofing nail. You're going to have to make adjustments according to how your deck is constructed, but it's important to make sure that any of the water coming down the wall is diverted away and into the ceiling of this structure. So as you can see, we have the flashing installed, and another thing you can do, you can get flashing tape to help seal any joints that you might have, and you can barely see that I ran some clear sealant all around the edges where the metal meets the wood. We've also installed the first layer of wood below. This will be the nailer for the corrugated roofing, and we started with a 5/4 by 6-inch piece of wood. That's 1 inch actual, and the next challenge is to go ahead and measure how we will mount the wood and slope it down towards the gutter. Okay, next step is to figure out how much to slope the ceiling to drain water. It's important to check to see if your deck is already sloped. So in this case, we took a laser level. You could also do this with a regular level, and we leveled it up and shot across. And I don't know if you can see in the video, but we measured it 6 foot away, and this deck already slopes. We've taken a piece of the gutter and attached it to the beam where we think it'll go, and we've attached some string lines to show the slope at the bottom point going all the way up to the starting point, and also some string lines going crossways about every 24 inches on center, which is recommended by the Tough Tex panels we're going to use. So depending on the type of panels you're using, the spacing of the fasteners will determine where you put the purlins that we're going to attach to the existing joists of the deck. We need to adjust the heights of the purlins and step them down as we come back down to the gutter and leave enough room so that the water can drain off of these panels properly into the 5-inch gutter. Okay, so after we get the string lines in place, here's an example of how we're going to install our 1x6 purlins and adjust the height with about a 6 or 8 inch piece of pressure treated 2x4 screwed to the joists above. This will allow, as you can see, a consistent slope down from the brick wall of the house down to a point where the corrugated roof can be attached to the bottom of these purlins and drain into the gutter. Okay, as you can see, we have all the purlins installed now with a nice gentle slope from the house all the way down to the beam, and we're ready now to install the corrugated plastic. We purchased Tough-Tex ceiling panels from Lowe's and decided to get the Seacoaster tan color, and we are able to use 8-foot lengths without cutting them, which is fortunate, but I believe they're pretty easy to cut with a saw that is set up for cutting plywood. So one thing that I recommend is putting together a type of holder. We just use 2 pieces of 2x2 together with some 2x4 spacers and some handy vice grips to hold them up to the purlins, and that allows us to hold the plastic in place. And as you can see, we got our first row of Tough-Tex installed. Another nice detail is to take the Tough-Tex foam closure strips, which look like this, and they close off the ends of the corrugated plastic. And what I've done, I've taken some vinyl paint to paint them before installing so that they kind of match up and disappear with the gutter. So you can see when we're done, we have our ceiling panels properly installed, fasteners, every other corrugation as recommended by the manufacturer, and attached to the supports that we put up under the deck. And we're sloping gently down to our gutter that we installed along the beam. And that gutter slopes slightly to my right to a downspout, and we'll drain all the water away from under the deck. A minor detail that you might want to pursue is between the gutter and the corrugated deck, we took some of the Tough-Tex foam sealant and inserted the foam between the gutter and the corrugations and sealed it with some silicone. So that gives us a nice tight seam along there, and once we get our screen walls up, we'll help prevent any bugs from getting into the interior space. So an option, if you want to get fancy, is to enclose the overhangs of the deck. And you can see in this case we have some overhangs that extend out beyond where our screen wall is going to be. But I've gone ahead and I've installed some flashing, and we'll put the corrugated ceiling panels up there to make it look like a continuous plane from the interior to the exterior, and we'll also drain the water away from the perimeter screen walls, which should help make it a little drier inside the screen porch. For flashing, in this case we used some plastic flashing, and I found that that was a lot easier to work with than the metal flashing. Easy to cut with a scissor actually, and very bendable. You can bend it just like the metal with your hands and staple it into place. In this case I use stainless steel staples that won't rust and some silicone caulk to make a tight seal. And that drains the water back to our gutter, which is on the other side of this beam. Okay, now that the ceiling is done, we can start on the walls. So one of the first things you need to do after you lay out and decide where the walls are going to be built is quite often you do have some utilities in the way. So in this case, because of the difficulty of moving these utilities in a brick wall, we're going to sleeve some of the wires and the water hose through the wall. And because we're going to have two vertical 2x4s against the wall, we can make some cuts and put some plastic pipe in to sleeve these items. We've also gone ahead and lined up the lumber we need to use and given it a couple of coats of stain. This will be a lot easier than doing it when it's fully erected, and will make it look a lot better when it's done. Okay, a few thoughts about our particular setup here that may or may not be a part of your installation. We have an existing patio that is pavers set into firm sand that slopes about a ½ inch per foot, or a ½ inch over 10 foot. And in order to make up that difference, we're going to install our base, which is going to be two 2x6s on joist hangers against the wall and also against the column. These 2x6s on the bottom, we're going to attach a garage door seal, and we'll do that with stainless steel staples, and in that way we can seal out water as well as many bugs as possible from our screen patio. Another thought is when we're up against the wall, we have a brick wall which is inevitably uneven, so we're going to take some seal foam and put that against the wall before we put our first 2x4, and that will help seal the joint between the 2x4 and the brick as we go up. One way that we chose to fasten our 2x4s to the brick wall is to use these Tapcon concrete anchors. So as you can see, there's a drill bit about 3/16 of an inch, and you can drill through the wood and right into the brick. And then with 1.5 inches for your 2x4, that leaves you 1.25 inches into the brick for fastening. One thing I'd like to point out is, as you can see, these particular screws are approved for treated lumber, and that's important so that you don't get a chemical reaction going with your fasteners that will cause a problem over time. Okay, first step is we're going to take some liquid nails adhesive and our foam sill sealer and apply it to the back of our first stud that we're going to drill a hole through, and use the Tapcon fasteners to fasten it to the brick. So to seal the bottom of this lower joist that is going to be against our patio, we bought some garage door bottom seal, and as you can see, we've taken a stapler and stainless steel staples, and we're stapling that to the bottom. Then we'll flip it over, and it ought to seal nicely between the pavers and the joist, particularly because the pavers slope away from the building, and we want our joist level. Laying out our front wall, we're going to use 2x6s, two 2x6s for the base, and they're going to be connected to the existing deck posts with joist hangers. And as you can see, we're leaving about a 1/2 inch or more underneath the joist to allow for movement up and down of the pavers. And we'll seal that with the garage door rubber seal that we purchased. So once we have the base installed, next step is to frame up the walls, and that's pretty simple. As you can see here along the base, we've screwed in a 2x4 all along the base of the two 2x6s. We have 2x4s going vertically and horizontally. It's important to have one at about 34 inches high so that you don't accidentally bump into the screen and knock it out. Also gives some more lateral support. At each of the columns, the existing columns that are holding the deck up above the 6x6s here, we put another vertical 2x4 nailed to the column, and along the top 2x4 screwed up into the beam. So pretty simple framing. The only difference might be at your door. In this case, the screen door, we've framed the right jamb with just a 2x4 nailed to the 6x6 column, and we have a 2x4 horizontally across the top as a header, but two 2x4s for the jamb where the hinges are mounted. Screen door is pretty simple to install. Once you have the jambs installed, make sure you leave about the width of your stop. In this case, we have a 1x2 that we've installed as a stop with some weather stripping on either side of the door, and then mount the spring hinges to the jamb and also to the door. And support the bottom with some shims. In this case, we have a patio that is sloping down away, and we'll seal that with a rubber strip later on. Finally, to hold the screens in place and to give some more dimension to the exterior of the structure, we're installing some 1x4s as the trim on the outside. And as you can see, the 1x4s give it a little more dimension on the outside. We'll stain them again once everything's in place, and it gives us about a 1-inch lip on top and bottom of the 2x4 so that we can install our screens on the inside. In order to seal the gaps between the trim and the corrugated ceiling, as well as the trim and the gutter, we bought some rubber foam and we've installed it up above. And as you can see, between the trim and the corrugated ceiling above, and between the trim, we use some black foam and the gutter. We installed a wet rated fan, even though we could probably get by with a damp rated fan with our rain screen ceiling above. And we've installed that with a ceiling rated junction box above the fan, bolted securely to the structure above. And we use some plastic electric conduit, and we've run that across and down to a new junction box. In this case, we had to put in a 4x4 junction box with an extender, and this is where we got our feed from the old exterior floodlights that were on this side of the townhouse, and that gives us the power. And in this box is a controller provided by the fan manufacturer so that we can operate the fan remotely. We ran down from the controller box to an outlet. In this case, the fan has a remote control outlet that we've installed with a weatherproof box. Even though we're inside of the screen enclosure, probably a good idea since we do have driving rains and winter snow in this area of the Mid-Atlantic. And we ran down also to a ground fault circuit interrupter outlet with a weatherproof cover. Now, it's important that you use a licensed electrician or pass a local exam to understand how to wire this properly. But the feed from the power comes down from our junction box above to this outlet, and then the outlet has an output called the line side that goes up the conduit to the fan, so that the fan is protected by the ground fault circuit interrupter. And if for any, if in any case we have a problem with a short and someone touches it or it shorts to ground, the GFCI outlet here will cut off the current. You'll also notice that there's a WR on this outlet. Whenever they're installed outside, they should be weather resistant. Finally, it's time to do the screening. So we bought some fiberglass screen. In this case, it's 36 inches wide and 25 foot long. All of our openings are less than 36 inches. You want to have at least inch and a half, 2 inches on either side. And we're going to use these square frame corners, which make it a lot easier to put together the frames. And some aluminum frames that we'll be cutting. So the tools that we need will be a hacksaw, a drill, and a handy roller. One side rolls the screen into the groove, the other side rolls the spline into the groove, and some measuring and cutting equipment. Depending on the type of screen you use will determine the thickness of the spline that you need. In this case, since we're using fiberglass screening as opposed to, say, pet-proof or aluminum screens, we can get by with a spline that's 0.14 inches in thickness. So with these type of corners, if we check the back, it says we should subtract 1.5 inches for the width of the corners. So it's about 3/4 of an inch for each corner, or 1.5 inches total in the opening. So what we've done is we're planning for the 1.5 inches for the corners, but an additional 1/4 of an inch for the gap. So we have about 1/8 of an inch theoretically between the frame and our wood all the way around. So next we measure the opening, and you can see in this case that the top and the bottom vary a little bit, as well as the two sides. So nothing is going to be square or a perfect rectangle. And we want the screens to fit snugly, so we got an exact measurement, and we'll subtract 1 3/4 inches from the height and 1 3/4 inches from the width. So when we do the math, you can see at the bottom, we know the dimensions of each of the aluminum frame pieces that we need to cut. You've heard the saying that you should measure twice and cut once. Well, that doesn't work for me. I found you got to measure 3 times, 4 times, and then cut once, so as not to waste anything. So if you don't have a big table in order to assemble your frames, you can do what I did. Got our 2 sawhorses and took a door down from one of the basement utility rooms that we can use temporarily and repaint it when we put it up. So we cut our frames according to our dimensions, and as you can see, we're getting ready to put the corners on and assemble the frames, and then we'll be able to put in the screen. Okay, we've laid the screen out on top of the frame. It's been assembled. We have our roller. First thing we do is roll the screen into the frame, and then we're going to apply the spline and work it around the perimeter. The corners, you may have to use a screwdriver to get the spline fully into the corners, and don't pull too tight on the screening, otherwise you may warp the frame, and it will typically, because of the impression here, will tighten it up enough. And as you can see, we have the spline in the joint, and we're pressing it down with the roller, the other end of the roller. Okay, now we have the spline rolled in all the way around the corners, through the corners, and we're ready to trim. Just take a knife, cut off the end of the spline, and trim by dragging your knife on top of the spline here to cut away the excess screening. Before you put the screening in, you want to pre-drill some holes for the screws that we're going to mount. In our case, we've used some sheet metal screws that are 3/4 inch long, number 6 type pan head screws that ought to do the job nicely, allow us to remove the frame should we ever need to replace the screening. In our case, we put them about 2 inches in from each corner and 16 inches or so on center, but it's really up to you. So our original concept of a screen patio is finally complete. Here's what it looks like. So hopefully it's been helpful to you, and best of luck on your screen patio project.